Hi everybody, Steven here. If you're not sure what a virtual machine is, if you never deployed one before in vSphere, hey, stick around. We're going to cover it, okay? So see you in a bit. Bye-bye. Thanks for sticking around. Why don't we jump right into it? Okay, so what is a virtual machine? Now, hey, if this is stuff that you're interested in, hey, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. More subscribers, the better. And without subscribers, there's no content, okay? So let's jump right into it. So first of all, when we talk about a virtual machine, if you've seen my virtualization 101 video, if you're not too sure about that stuff, virtual machine is really just a computer you're building in software. So your virtual machine is going to be comprised of various components. Just like me building a computer, well, I want a processor, how many processors, how much memory, how much disk, that sort of thing. So when we look at a virtual machine today as of vSphere 8.0, and I'm sure this might have changed with update, whatever. Anyways, typically a virtual machine can have up to 768 virtual CPUs. Wow, it's pretty crazy. 24 terabytes of memory as well. This is what a VM can have. When we talk about disk, and I'll probably do a different video on that because there's different ways we can deploy this, but you can have up to 4 SCSI adapters, 15 devices per SCSI adapter, which kind of makes sense. If you're using the pair virtualized adapter, that's 64 devices per. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Up to 4 NVMe adapters and 15 devices per. Again, if you got like NVMe storage. Up to 10 virtual NICs. That number hasn't changed in many, many years. You get a keyboard and that's a mouse. You get a mouse. You get one floppy with 2 devices. Yes, a floppy, folks, for those of you who've never seen one before. Up to 8 graphic cards. Okay, virtual graphics cards. If you want to do Bitcoin, I'm kidding about the Bitcoin mining. If you're doing like machine learning and stuff like that, or maybe AutoCAD at a desktop or something. IDE controller with 4 devices, again, like CD-ROM, USB up to 20. 3 parallel ports, 32 serial ports, and 4 SATA controllers and 30 devices. So again, this is the hardware that you're able to build. And this kind of changes over time as the newer versions of vSphere come out. They usually add more, increase the capacities and stuff like that. Now, before we just jump right into creating a VM, a virtual machine is generally just a bunch of files. So when I create a VM, one of the things you'll see, it's going to ask me, what data store do I want to store it on? Now, depending on the type of data store, the virtual machines will either be files or objects, okay? If it's a VMFS file system that you formatted, or if it's an NFS data store that you mounted, those are basically files. And you folks have seen me format. If you watched my storage, my iSCSI, I actually created my volume with that. Now, an object type storage is virtual SAN. If you're playing with virtual SAN, I'll do a video on that much later on. Or if you've got a disk subsystem, a physical disk storage subsystem that supports this, I don't want to say new because it's been around for about 10 years, newerish technology called vVols or virtual volumes. Again, that thing uses, both of these here actually uses storage policies. And it uses objects. So anyways, but let's keep it simple for now. Let's talk about files. So when you look at a VM, it's comprised of a bunch of files. You'll see a file with the VMX extension. It'll be the name of the VM.vmx. That's the config file. Technically, I could go in and edit that file, but I wouldn't do that unless you know what you're doing, okay? You'll see there's a additional config file, VMXF. You'll also see, you might see if it's a template, and I'll talk about templates later, it's a VMTX. You'll see this disk descriptor file, the name of the VM.vmdk. That's another text file describing the disks, the virtual disks. All right, your virtual disk will be with the extension -flat and may have a number appended to the back of that, .vmdk. That's where your data is. That's the important file because that's the one you want to make sure you got copies of. There'll be an NVRAM file as well for the BIOS. The virtual machine paging backup file. There is the snapshot files. I'll do videos and snapshots. There is a snapshot data file. There is a swap file, and I'll talk about what that gets used when I get into resources, but typically that swap file, it'll be equal to the amount of memory You give a VM, that's typically minus its reservation. I'll talk about that. And it's created when you turn on the VM. It's deleted when you turn it off. I'll talk about that. There might be suspend file. You can suspend a VM, like pause it. So that would have like the contents of process state and memory. There's log file. This log file by default rotates when you turn on the VM. So we'll go up to 6 copies and then we rotate. So for example, the current one will be VMware.log. If I power off the VM and I power it back on, a new VMware.log will be created and the other one will be VMware-1.log. If I power off the VM and power it back on, the old one will be renamed from VMware log to VMware-1.log. The other one will be -2.log and so on to 6. So that rotates based on the powering off and powering on. This file doesn't usually get that big, but you could change the behavior of it if you wanted to. So it holds more copies or gets cycled after a certain size. But anyways, that's it. Yeah, and here they talk a little bit about it. So it'll be -1, -2. So those are the files that make up the VM. The one I really want to point out, which I always point out, is the flat.vmdk. That's where your data is. All the other ones, technically, I can recreate. The flat.vmdk, that's where your data is. Okay. So there's a thing called VMware Tools. And VMware Tools gives us various drivers. First of all, one of the things you'll notice, especially in Windows when you're using the remote console, is the mouse driver is going to suck, right? So this gives you the enhanced mouse driver. Video is also going to suck. This gives you the enhanced video drivers. Your virtual network, again, is not going to be the greatest, but when you install VMware Tools, it gives you the capabilities of using this VMXNet3 driver. And there's different drivers, and there's the E1000, there's a couple other ones, but generally this is the one you want. That's the one that has the best performance. Again, that's kind of debatable, but anyways, I'll leave it at that. But this is a virtual driver that knows it's a virtual driver, so to speak. So this is the one you want to aim for letting it installed. There's also a pair of virtual SCSI adapter. There's various different adapters. I might do a video talking about those, especially from a performance perspective, but there's like bus logic, there's the LSI, SAS, and SCSI controllers. And really when you create your VM, it's going to kind of pick the one for your operating system you select, which you'll see. The pair virtualized one, this is a higher performance driver, more IOs per second, like anything like typically over 50,000 IOs per second. So a lot of times what you may do is you may boot your VM with whatever driver that it discovered, maybe the LSI or whatever. Then you would give it a second disk controller, maybe the pair virtual, and obviously your operating system won't see it. But once you install VMware Tools, it will see that SCSI controller. Then you attach disks to it, and then those disks will be the high-performing disks. So you can do something like that. Some operating systems, like Linux and stuff like that, the newer ones, ship with this pair virtualized SCSI already, so you can actually boot from it. I think even some of the newer versions of Windows servers also ship with this as well. So it recognizes it. So technically, it's going to depend on the operating system. When I do the demo, we'll check out a couple things. There's also a ballooning driver that gets installed. It's called VMM Control. This is actually allows us to overcommit memory. I'll do a whole video on that. Time synchronization with the host. So with your ESXi server, you have that as an option. The ability to quiescent snapshots. I'll talk about snapshots, but the ability to flush our memory out when we do snapshots of VMs and more as well. So VMware Tools is something you definitely want to install. There's different flavors of it. I might do another video on that, but we'll spend a lot of time just wasting there. There's also a bunch of different hardware versions of your virtual machine. Now this really kind of depends on your ESXi version, right? So for ESXi 8.0 update 2, it looks like it's hardware version 21. Version 8, it's hardware version 20. I can't remember what the difference between those. There could be some subtle differences. And again, as you go down the food chain here, you'll actually see. So this has been around for a very long time, to be honest with you, right? I can't remember the hardware version I was playing with many, many moons ago, but and we'll come back to that after. The hardware version here dictates the hardware that you can have. So usually the older versions have less processor, less memory, may not have GPUs and all that stuff. So so generally speaking, it's going to vary based on your ESXi. Okay. that's it. Why don't we just jump right to it and get into doing the demo, okay? So we'll see you back in 2 seconds. Okay, everybody, we are back. So why don't we go ahead and create a VM here, all right? So I could right click on my data center if I want to. I can right click on a host. I'm gonna right click on a host just because, well, I just feel like it, right? I'm basically gonna right click, and then at that point, I'm gonna say new virtual machine. When I click on that, I get a few choices. The first one is create a new VM, which we're gonna do. I could deploy from a template, maybe I'll do a video on that one later. Clone an existing VM, clone a VM to a template, convert a template to a VM, or clone a template to a template. I wonder what that's for. I'll do some videos on that. But right now we're just creating a VM, so let's keep it simple. I'll click on next. It's going to ask me what's the display name of the VM. I'm going to call this Win 10-1, whatever. When you're coming up with your display names, you want to think about this. You don't want to do just what I did, Win 10, and then I'll rename it down the road. That's kind of considered really bad practice to rename the display name of the VMs. One of the reasons is, remember I mentioned before that your VM is comprised of a bunch of files or objects. And those files or objects will be based on the name of the VM. Okay, so if you rename your VM, your display name of the VM, I rename, I don't like Win 10.1, I'm going to call it something else. I could do that in vCenter. It will show me the name I renamed it to, but it does not modify the file names nor the object names. Now, there's a way to get around it. It's a thing called storage vMotion. I'll talk about that in another video. But again, think about the name and away you go. At that point, you can pick the location. Maybe you got a folder or a data center. I'm just going to put it in my data center. I'll click next. At that point, it's asking me what host. I already right-clicked on host 1, so it defaulted to that. But I could put on host 2 or 3 or whatever. We'll talk about clusters later. So I'll click next. Now it's asking me to select what storage I want to put it on. I actually created, in the iSCSI video, hopefully if you watched that, I actually created a Site A shared 01 volume. It's about 140 gigs in size, right? It's asking me, do I want to encrypt this VM? I'm not going to be doing encryption. I'll do a video on that later. Disable storage DRS. I'm just going to leave that deselected. I'll talk about storage DRS in a much later video. And then they talk about storage policies. Again, when I get into storage and stuff like that, I'll probably talk about storage policies, but I'm just going to leave the defaults for now. And I selected this one and it says, oh, okay, it looks like it's okay, it's compatible, all right? And I'll click on next. Now it's asking me what version ESXi will this VM be running on. Notice I'm running 8.0.update 2, right? If I've got other hosts out there that this VM is going to run on, let's say I got a version 8 hosts and a mixture, I would have to pick the lowest common denominator, right? But generally speaking, if you've got a mixed environment and this VM is going to run on all of those hosts, you got to look at which one's the least that you have. Oh, I got like a version 7 host, and I got to pick that. And you can upgrade it later. And notice it says hardware version 17 here, and I talked about that in the previous slide. I'm just going to pick the latest ones, version 21. I'll click next. Now it's asking me what operating system I want to install, Windows, Linux, or other. So if I pick Windows here, if I hit the drop down, come on. If I hit the drop down, you see all the different flavors of Windows. We're going to install Windows 10, but if I pick, let's say, Linux, you'll see all the different distros of Linux, VMware Photon OS, Red Hat. There's a whole whack load of them here, right? And then other, if I click on other, again, these aren't officially supported, but doesn't mean it won't work. Like, look at this Mac OS, FreeBSD. Look at this, IBM OS 2 is going to make a comeback. Woohoo, right? Anyways, Novell NetWare. So again, doesn't mean this is supported, but it would probably work, okay? I've done that many times, many years ago. I'm going to install Windows. I'm going to pick Windows. I'm going to pick Windows 10 64-bit. If you want to enable Windows virtualization-based security, that's typically available Windows 10 and higher. You can enable that if your environment needs it. I'm going to leave mine off. It's a new kind of security feature. So I'm just going to click next. At this point, it gives me the choice to customize the hardware. So I can add more processors. Notice it kind of defaulted to 2 processors for the VM. I'm going to give it 1. You know what the heck, I'll leave a 2 on it. Memory, actually, no, I'm going to put the 1. Memory, how much memory do I want to give it? I can leave it at 4 or whatever. Maybe I'll give it, whatever. I'll leave it maybe at the default. I'll talk about reservations and limits and all that in a separate video, but there are some advanced settings. Notice the hard drive, it came up and picked a 48 gig hard drive. Maybe I'll make this 100 gigs in size, just because I feel like it. And then over here, it's talking about, it talks about disk provisioning. So I'm giving this thing a virtual disk, and it says, how do you want to provision this? Thick provision, lazy zeroed, thick provision, eager zeroed, thin provision. So thick provision, I picked 100 gig there. What thick provision will do is create a 100 gig file. Boom, it pre-allocates all that space. Lazy zeroed means I'm only gonna zero out certain blocks, not all of them. Think of it as like a quick format. We don't zero out all the blocks, we just do a few. And as you start to write to the disk, that's when we start zeroing more, okay? Think of it as a quick format. Thick provision eager zeroed is, I got a 100 gig disk, it's gonna make a 100 gig file. Boom, it's gonna take it, right? So it's pre-allocated. Eager zeroed, I'm gonna zero out every single block to make sure everything's gone there. If I select that from a performance perspective, it's slower to create that because it's going to do it like a full format. But then from a performance perspective afterwards for writes, it's better because I don't have that extra overhead of zeroing out blocks before I write to a block. Thin provision, which I'm going to select now, is I created a 100 gig disk. I said, okay, I want a 100 gig disk. It doesn't create a flat file 100 gig size. It's going to make a small file. And as I start to fill that up, so it's non-pre-allocate, as I start to fill it up, it starts to make that file bigger, 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 and bigger. So that could save you a lot of space, but it can also come back to haunt you if you start to over-allocate your storage. Next thing you know, you run out of storage, and these VMs go, hey, I got a 100 gig disk you told me, but what, I'm running out. You could corrupt VMs. Thin provision is also, it's not eager zeroed, it's lazy zeroed, so it just only formats blocks as it needs it. So I'm going to pick thin because I'm in a lab environment. You got to really watch out in your environment. If you're picking thin, you really want to monitor your disk usage. Okay. Notice so let me just minimize that. That's what I like. The new SCSI controller is based on LSI logic, a serial attached SCSI or SAS. That's the virtual disk controller. You'll see there's a CD-ROM over here as well. I want to show you something. Let's back up. Let's back up the slide. I'm going to pick a different operating system. Let's try some experiments here. I personally haven't tried this. The first time I'm doing this right now. I'm going to pick Windows Server 2022. Okay, and I'm going to go next. Note the SCSI controller came up as Paravirtual. Paravirtual is a more higher performance driver, and I mentioned before that a lot of the newer OSs will have come pre-built with that, so that's really cool. Some of the older ones don't, so certain distros of Linux will. You'll notice Windows 10 didn't, so I'm just going to go back and select Windows 10 here. Windows 10, 64-bit, and then again it goes back to the LSI. So depending on your OS, it's going to pick something appropriate here. But I'm sure if I pick something really old like OS2, I'd probably pick Bus Logic or something like that. Network, now it gave me one virtual network card. I could add more if I wanted to. So, now it's going to ask me to plug in what port do I want to plug it into. So I'm going to say browse. Now I'm going to plug it into my port group called production. Okay, I got a distributed switch. I created that in our video. I'm just going to put it on my port group called production and say okay. I think that's all. We'll talk about other settings in probably another video. But what I want to point out here is how do I install the operating system? It's saying I'm going to install it via CD-ROM. Now, it says, where's the CD-ROM? Is it on the client device? Now, I'm remote desktoping into a machine. So is it on that device it's asking me? Or my physical machine? If I wasn't remote desktoping in, do I have a CD-ROM I could plug it in, right? Data store ISO, that would be like, let me cancel that. Data store ISO would be like my VMFS file system. Content library. I could have an ISO and a content library. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, I'll do a video on it. And host device. Now, just imagine, remember, this is a VM running on a physical box. If that box had a CD-ROM, I could pop the CD in there and install it from that. I'm going to say data store ISO. These are the two common ones, data store or content library. Content library would probably be the better choice, but we'll talk about that when I get to that video. I'm going to put data store ISO. Now, at this point, I'll say connect that power on. Now, let me just say data store ISO. Okay. Now it's asking me what data store do I want to get this ISO from. So I got my shared data store, and I'm going to select this, and I'm going to say okay. And then it's scanning that. Now, what you would normally do, and I'll show you that after I select this, actually already uploaded this ISO to my data store. I'll show you how I did that in a second. So I'm going to pick this and I'm going to say OK. I got it, data store ISO, connect it, power on. Great. I'm going to say next. I'm going to say finish, and then I'm done. So I just wait for it to create that VM, and it should be done. Come on, give it a few seconds. I don't have the fastest lab on the planet, but anyways, it's doing its business there, right? There we go. It created it, and give it a second. And I expand it. There we go. Windows 10 virtual machine. Now, before I continue, let me show you how I could have uploaded that. I'm going to go in my data store view here. I'm going to select my shared data store. And at that point, come on. That was the data store that's on my iSCSI subsystem if you watch that video. All right. And you'll see over here, upload files. It's taking a little while to refresh. Again, I don't have the fastest lap. Upload files. I can click that, and then locally I can select my ISO. So that's how I uploaded it. Okay. Let's go back to my host and clusters view. And let's power on this VM. Now, I'm going to have to be pretty quick because it's going to boot up, and it's going to prompt me to boot from the CD. So I'm going to say power on. And then I'm going to probably miss it the first time, to be honest with you. So power on, and then I'm going to go to the web console. And I'll probably mixed it. Yeah, I missed it. Okay, let me get out of this console, go back to this, and then just say right click, and then power, and then reset. And I'll say yes. And I'm going to go back to that console. It's going to ask me to press any key to boot from CD. Come on. I get it. There we go. So it's booting up into Windows, okay? I'm not going to show you installing Windows. So at this point, folks, I'm just going to fast forward it while it's installing, okay? So you can watch along. I'll probably put a little tune there. I'll fast forward. And at the end of this, we got to install VMware Tools. So we'll take a look at that. Okay, so we see it installed Windows there. I had a few hiccups with my remote desktop. Not sure why, but that's another story. So the next thing you need to do is install VMware Tools inside this thing, okay? Let's take a look at what we basically have. If I right-click over here, Device Manager. So right off the bat, my mouse actually is not so bad, but it's not the greatest. But I get a basic display adapter. Let's look at network adapter. I get this Intel Gigabit. Anyway, so there's some basic stuff here. So I want to install VMware Tools. It's a little sluggish here. Let me just go over here now. I'm going to right click on the VM and I'm going to say, come here, install VMware Tools. So guest OS, install VMware Tools. I'm going to say yes. Now it tells me VMware Tools includes drivers, improved mouse, graphics, networking, storage, and so on, right? Then it says click mount to mount the disk images with VMware Tools on the virtual CD-ROM. Then go to the console and install, use the wizard to install it. Okay, so I'm going to say mount. And it should actually now mount that within the OS here. If I actually go in, let's see. So notice, yeah, so they're mounted the CD-ROM, right? Select what I want to do with this. Again, I can just say run the setup.exe or manually do it. So it took a little bit of time. So I'll say, okay, run setup. And then I'm going to say yes. Go ahead and do the install. Give it a few seconds. Come on. And there's something, I know most of you have done the VMware Tools before, but to me, something you may not be aware of something, because one of the stuff when I teach my NSX classes for guest introspection and network introspection, there's some modules that don't get, or drivers don't get installed by default. So the typical wizard, you click, you read it, you click this. You can go typical, complete, or custom. I'm going to go custom so you can see what's going on. A lot of people might just hit typical. I don't think it's a good thing to do. That's my personal opinion. I'll show you why. When I click on custom, it says VMware time provider. This is what I wanted to show you is here. What doesn't get installed by default, if you pick typical, is the network file introspection driver and the NSX network introspection driver. These are drivers that allow third-party solutions to go in and look inside the VM for malware and stuff like that. And the network introspection allows us, again, third-party solutions to go in and look at, again, like packet captures and stuff like that. So these are usually things that are probably good to install, because if you don't, then if you need it afterwards, you'll have to do a reinstall. I'm just going to say complete, to be honest with you, okay? I'm going to click next. I'm going to go install. And then at that point, it zips across. It does its installation. It's going to ask for a reboot at this point, right? Now, I'm showing you Windows. You do the same kind of thing in Linux. You mount the CD-ROM. You do the install. Away you go. If you folks are, while this is installed, if you want to see a Linux one, let me know in the comments down below. I'll see if I can fire up a distro of Linux. And there's a couple different tools you can install. But leave comments below if there's something in particular you want to see, right? You'll notice the screen is starting to flicker and stuff. Now, one of the things, while this is installing, right now I'm using the remote console to manage this. That's fine, okay? So VMware Tools updated mouse plugins, okay, required for restart. So here's this finish. I'll say a restart, yes. I will watch it boot up. So I'm using this remote console to manage this, and this is considered really not the best way to do it. Obviously, in the beginning, you do this, but to really manage the machine remotely, you should be using a remote desktop and not this console. This console is like, think of this as walking up to the display of your computer. You don't want to do that. You would rather do everything remotely using like our remote desktop or whatever the case may be, right? There's different ways you can manage this. Like I said, so we'll just wait for this to boot up and we'll kind of just see what happens here. By the way, yeah, so let's give it a few seconds to come up. Come on. Please wait. And we'll see what we can see over here. Okay. Okay, everybody, we can see it. Install VMware Tools. It rebooted. Let me log in. Now, when I go over to here, right click, I'll go to Device Manager. Let's look at the display adapter. You'll see I got an SVGA. All right, let's look at the mice. Again, you see I got VMware pointing device. Let's look at the network adapter. The network adapter still comes up as an Intel, okay, which is interesting. I'm going to close this console. I'm going to right-click on. I'm actually going to shut down the machines. One of the things VMware Tools lets me do is shut down remotely. So I'm going to basically say shut down the guest OS. I'm going to say yes. Okay, you'll see why in a second. Let me right-click on this VM. And where's my edit settings? Edit settings. Let's look at the network adapter. Actually, come on. Let's make sure it's shut off. So it's shut down now. I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to go edit settings. And let's look at the network adapter. I can expand that. Notice the adapter type is E1000. So the adapter type is E1000. And it's not really letting me change that whatsoever, right? So let me go into here. Let's go into remove device. Okay, so the device is gone. Let's go to add a new device. And I'm going to pick my, where are you? Where are you? Controllers, network adapter. So under my new network, so I'm plugged into my port group over here, production. and it's E1000, and now it's going to let me change it to VMX-Net. Again, E1000 is again emulating Intel. PCI pass-through, if you want to give it a dedicated card on the machine, there's issues with that, especially with vMotion. VMX-Net 3 is like the highest performing one, which is what I want. So I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to pick that. I'll say OK. I'm done. Let's power on the VM now and see what happens. Okay, so I just powered it on. Bear with me a second here, folks. Let me give it a few seconds here. Maybe a little bit more than a few seconds. So we see it's booting up. So what we want is we want that fast network adapter. So let's see what we got here. Let's log in. And we give it a few seconds here. So I'm just checking to see my timeouts on this machine. I think the machine I'm on here that I'm doing my virtualization on is got a flaky network card. I'm going to go into Device Manager now. Let's see what we see. Network adapters, VMX-Net 3 network adapter. Let's double click on that. You'll see general over here. So advanced, whatever. Anyways, so there's the driver. We've got the more higher performing driver here. This driver is capable of about, realistically about 9.5 gigabits per second, whereas that other driver was only a 1 gig driver, right? So again, so that's good news. All right. So that's basically it. I wanted to show you installing VMware Tools. And setting up the VM. For the most part, it's pretty basic, except for that part of VMware Tools. A couple of things you got to watch out for. I know, like in Linux, a lot of times it just replaces the driver, which is fine. But again, check your OS, make sure you get the latest VMX-Net 3 driver. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. If you found this entertaining, hey, hit the thumbs up for me. I'd appreciate it. Also, if there's any, if you kind of like this sort of thing, please subscribe to the channel. It would help me out quite a bit. Without subscribers, there's no content. Also, I'm going to leave comments down below on something you want to see. I got more NSX stuff come up. I'm actually going to do some disaster recovery with NSX and all that kind of stuff. But I've had requests for some of these, just the basic vSphere stuff, right? But that's it anyway, folks. Thanks a lot. See you soon. The next one's going to be vMotion. Both of these are probably published together at the same time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.